Steve Jobs' 2011 funeral featured an empty coffin. Apple Board of Directors Insider Dr. Michael Chen's leaked documents revealed that the technology legend's death was completely fabricated and he still lives in a secret facility 200 meters beneath Cupertino. For the past 13 years, all of Apple's decisions have been made from an underground bunker. October 5, 2011, was supposed to be the day the world lost one of its greatest visionaries. News of Steve Jobs' death from pancreatic cancer sent shockwaves through the technology industry and beyond. Millions mourned the loss of the man who had revolutionized personal computing, transformed the music industry, and created the smartphone revolution. But according to classified documents obtained by Dr. Michael Chen, a former Apple Board of Directors strategic advisor, the entire world had been deceived. Dr. Chen had worked within Apple's highest levels of management for over 8 years, serving as a strategic consultant to the board of directors on matters involving company succession planning, crisis management, and long-term strategic vision. His security clearance gave him access to information that was restricted to fewer than a dozen individuals within the entire Apple organization, including details about contingency plans that most employees never knew existed. The first indication that something was fundamentally wrong with the official narrative of Steve Jobs' death came from Dr. Chen's involvement in post-mortem corporate governance planning. In the months following Jobs' supposed death, Dr. Chen was tasked with reviewing the transition of authority and decision-making processes within Apple's executive structure. But what he discovered raised troubling questions about who was actually making the company's most important decisions. Corporate decisions that were supposedly being made by the new leadership team showed patterns and characteristics that were unmistakably consistent with Steve Jobs' known decision-making style and strategic thinking. The level of detail, the specific technological focus, and the revolutionary approach to product development all bore the distinctive hallmarks of Jobs' personal involvement, despite his supposed absence from the company. Dr. Chen initially attributed these similarities to the lasting influence of Jobs' leadership philosophy and the training he had provided to his successors. But as he analyzed more decision patterns and strategic documents, he began to notice anomalies that suggested direct rather than indirect influence. Corporate memos contained specific references and technical details that seemed to require knowledge that only Jobs possessed, and strategic decisions showed a level of innovation and risk-taking that seemed inconsistent with a leadership team operating without their visionary founder. The breakthrough in Dr. Chen's investigation came when he gained access to Apple's most classified facility planning documents. While reviewing construction and maintenance records for Apple's various campuses and facilities, he discovered evidence of a massive underground construction project that had been undertaken in secrecy between 2009 and 2011, during the period when Jobs was supposedly dying of cancer. The underground facility was far more sophisticated and extensive than any normal corporate infrastructure project. The construction records showed that Apple had built a completely self-contained underground complex spanning over 100,000 square feet, located 200 meters beneath the Cupertino campus. The facility included advanced life support systems, sophisticated medical equipment, cutting-edge technology laboratories, and living quarters designed for long-term habitation. Most significantly, the facility's construction timeline corresponded exactly with the period of Jobs' supposed illness and decline. The project had been initiated in early 2009, around the time when Jobs first announced his health problems, and had been completed just months before his supposed death. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Dr. Chen's investigation revealed that the underground facility had been designed specifically to support one individual for an extended period of time. The living quarters were customized with personal preferences and specifications that matched Jobs' known lifestyle and requirements. The technology laboratories were equipped with prototype development capabilities that would allow for continued work on cutting-edge Apple products. The medical facilities included equipment capable of treating and managing advanced pancreatic cancer and other serious health conditions. The facility's security measures were extraordinary, even by Apple's secretive standards. Access was limited to fewer than 5 individuals within the entire Apple organization, and all construction and maintenance work had been conducted by external contractors who had been required to sign unprecedented non-disclosure agreements. The facility's existence was not recorded in any standard Apple documentation, and its operational costs were hidden within other budget categories throughout the company's financial records. Dr. Chen realized that he had discovered evidence of an elaborate deception designed to allow Steve Jobs to continue leading Apple while appearing to be dead to the outside world. The underground facility provided Jobs with everything he needed to maintain his involvement in Apple's operations while avoiding the public scrutiny and health concerns that had been affecting the company's stock price and public perception. The fake death scenario made strategic sense from multiple perspectives. Jobs' health problems had been causing significant volatility in Apple's stock price, as investors worried about the company's ability to continue innovating without its visionary leader. By staging his death and allowing the company to demonstrate its ability to continue operating successfully under new leadership, Apple could stabilize its stock price while secretly maintaining Jobs' involvement in critical decisions. The deception also allowed Jobs to work without the constant media attention and speculation about his health that had been interfering with his ability to focus on product development. From his underground facility, he could continue innovating and guiding Apple's strategic direction without the distractions and pressures of public life. Dr. Chen's investigation revealed that the fake death operation had been planned and executed with extraordinary attention to detail. Medical records had been falsified to create a convincing narrative of declining health and eventual death from pancreatic cancer. The funeral and burial had been carefully staged to provide public closure while ensuring that no one would ever attempt to verify the actual contents of the coffin. The operation required the cooperation of a small number of trusted individuals within Apple's leadership team, as well as medical professionals and government officials who were willing to participate in the deception. The scope of the conspiracy was limited to fewer than 10 people, all of whom had been provided with substantial financial incentives and legal protections to ensure their continued silence. From his underground facility, Jobs had continued to guide Apple's product development and strategic planning through secure communication channels with his trusted lieutenants above ground. Major product announcements, design decisions, and strategic initiatives continued to bear his influence, though they were publicly attributed to the new leadership team. Dr. Chen discovered that the facility included sophisticated holographic and video communication systems that allowed Jobs to participate in meetings and decision-making processes without physically appearing above ground. Advanced artificial intelligence systems helped to modify his voice and appearance in recorded communications to account for the aging process and maintain the illusion that the decisions were being made by other executives. The technology used in the underground facility was years ahead of anything available to the general public. Apple had invested hundreds of millions of dollars in developing life extension technologies, advanced medical treatment systems, and communication technologies that would allow Jobs to continue working effectively despite his health challenges. The facility also served as a testing ground for future Apple technologies. Jobs continued to work on product development projects that would not be announced to the public for years or even decades after his supposed death. The underground laboratory contained prototypes and concepts that represented the next several generations of Apple products, all developed under Jobs' continued supervision. Dr. Chen's investigation revealed that Apple's most successful products released after 2011 had actually been developed or significantly influenced by Jobs during his time in the underground facility. The iPhone improvements, iPad innovations, and other technological advances that were publicly attributed to the post-Jobs leadership team were actually the result of continued work by the company's supposedly deceased founder. The financial structure supporting the underground facility was complex and carefully designed to avoid detection. Operational costs were distributed across multiple budget categories throughout Apple's massive corporate structure, making them virtually impossible to trace without access to the highest levels of financial documentation. The facility's existence was funded through a combination of corporate resources and personal wealth that Jobs had accumulated during his years of leadership. Dr. Chen also discovered that the underground facility included provisions for Jobs' continued involvement in Apple's operations for potentially decades into the future. The medical equipment and life support systems were designed to sustain him well beyond normal human lifespan, and the facility included research laboratories dedicated to developing even more advanced life extension technologies. The psychological and emotional toll of the deception on Jobs himself appeared to be significant. Dr. Chen found evidence of communications suggesting that Jobs struggled with the isolation and secrecy required by his underground existence. The man who had thrived on public presentations and direct interaction with consumers was forced to exercise his influence from the shadows, never able to receive public recognition for his continued contributions to Apple's success. The deception also created complex legal and ethical challenges for the individuals involved in maintaining the secret. Apple executives were forced to publicly mourn and memorialize a man who was still actively involved in company operations. They had to maintain the illusion of operating without Jobs' guidance while actually continuing to receive his direction on critical decisions. Dr. Chen's decision to reveal the truth about Jobs' fake death was motivated by his belief that shareholders and the public had a right to know who was actually making decisions at one of the world's most valuable companies. The deception represented a fundamental fraud against investors, consumers, and the general public who had been led to believe that Apple was operating under different leadership than was actually the case. The process of gathering evidence and preparing to go public with his revelations was extremely dangerous for Dr. Chen. Apple's security measures around the underground facility and the fake death operation were sophisticated and aggressive. Dr. Chen knew that revealing the truth would likely result in severe legal retaliation and potentially physical danger from the individuals involved in maintaining the secret. Working with investigative journalists and legal experts, Dr. Chen carefully documented his findings and prepared for the public release of information about Jobs' continued existence and influence within Apple. The evidence included facility construction records, financial documentation, communication logs, and witness testimony from individuals who had knowledge of the underground operation. The revelation that Steve Jobs had faked his death and continued to run Apple from an underground facility created an immediate international sensation. The story challenged fundamental assumptions about corporate governance, public disclosure requirements, and the relationship between technology companies and their public stakeholders. Apple's initial response to the revelations was to deny all allegations and claim that Dr. Chen's documentation was fabricated or misinterpreted. The company argued that any similarities between current operations and Jobs' historical approach were simply the result of his lasting influence on Apple's corporate culture and strategic thinking. However, as additional evidence emerged and other sources came forward with corroborating information, Apple was forced to acknowledge that unauthorized activities had been conducted using company resources. The company maintained that any such activities had been undertaken without the knowledge or approval of the current leadership team. The legal and regulatory implications of the fake death revelation were enormous. Securities regulators launched investigations into whether Apple had defrauded investors by misrepresenting the company's leadership structure and decision-making processes. The disclosure of material information about corporate governance was required by law, and the concealment of Jobs' continued involvement could constitute securities fraud on a massive scale. International governments also became involved in investigating the implications of the deception. The fake death operation had involved falsifying medical records and death certificates, which constituted criminal activity in multiple jurisdictions. The cooperation of government officials in maintaining the deception raised questions about the relationship between technology companies and regulatory authorities. For the technology industry as a whole, the Jobs revelation raised fundamental questions about transparency, corporate governance, and the cult of personality that had developed around certain technology leaders. The idea that a supposedly dead CEO could continue to influence major corporate decisions from beyond the grave challenged basic assumptions about how modern corporations operate. The psychological impact on Apple consumers and the general public was also significant. Millions of people had genuinely mourned Jobs' death and had found inspiration in his legacy and the company's ability to continue innovating after his loss. The revelation that his death had been fabricated created feelings of betrayal and confusion about the authenticity of the emotional connection they had felt to the Apple brand. For Steve Jobs personally, the exposure of his continued existence created an impossible situation. The man who had built his career on public presentations and direct communication with consumers was suddenly forced to confront the consequences of over a decade of deception and secrecy. The underground facility that had allowed Jobs to continue influencing Apple while avoiding public scrutiny ultimately became a prison that prevented him from receiving recognition for his continued contributions to technology and innovation. The fake death operation had achieved its strategic objectives for Apple as a corporation, but at enormous personal cost to the individual at its center. The Steve Jobs fake death scandal ultimately served as a watershed moment in understanding the relationship between technology companies, their leaders, and the public that invests in and consumes their products. It demonstrated the lengths to which corporations might go to maintain their competitive advantages and protect their strategic interests, even when doing so requires fundamental deception of their stakeholders. The case also highlighted the potential for technology and resources to be used in ways that challenge basic assumptions about life, death, and corporate accountability. As technology continues to advance and corporations accumulate unprecedented wealth and influence, the Jobs revelation serves as a reminder that the boundaries between possible and impossible, between public and private, and between life and death itself may be more fluid than anyone had previously imagined.